the first would be looking for what actually can create stable income as opposed to income highs and lows. Right. The second is and we've got a client that this is her mantra for the entire year is no heroics. How do you create a business that doesn't require heroics, where someone has to come in and save the day? Because I think as entrepreneurs, and I've used this a lot, it's Dan Sullivan's quote that entrepreneurs are really good firefighters, which sometimes means they're also really good arsonists.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. So, we know a truth that we hear a lot from business owners, which is that business feels a lot like a roller coaster. But today, Gwen and I are going to talk about what if that weren't true? What if your business could just live on the plains, avoiding the dramatic peaks and the opposite, dramatic valleys that comes with having big launches, constant pivots, or let's be honest, those adrenaline junkies among us, we enjoy that rush that comes from the feast and famine cycles until we don't. So today, Gwen is going to help us understand what it means to live in the plains, building that business that operates with steady, consistent growth rather than the dramatic highs and lows. If you're new here, I am Tonya Kubo. I am always joined with Gwen, but today, Gwen, I want you to open us up with tell us, why is it that the business world seems to be obsessed with the dramatic growth? And how is it, from your perspective, keeping us away from what really is sustainable success?
Well, so I think, and I don't remember, you probably have a better sense of when the whole, hey, let's have a giant launch and talk about how many zeros, our thing was. I mean, it's been forever ago, and I can't tell you when, because I just don't pay that close of attention. I know that your world, you have paid closer attention, but
yeah, I can't give you a year, and I don't think Jeff Walker is patient zero for the whole thing, but I think when Jeff Walker came out with his product launch formula, is when I think it became the established standard of success.
Right. Now that you're saying that, I'm thinking about, because I got the product launch formula book really early on as well, and looked at it and, did all of those things. So yeah. And that was 10, 12, 15 years ago, something like that. I mean,
probably 2014 if I had to guess, but I can call it.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say about, 10-ish plus years ago from our recording date now in 2025. And I think that I'll call it the bragging rights, because that's also a time that social media was really starting to take off as well. Not that it was, just starting, but that was a point that we were starting to, kind of the bubble was starting to just, blow up at the same time. And so I think the two of those things together made the whole idea of being able to say, oh, I did a launch and it was a $10,000 launch. It was a $100,000 launch. It was $1 million launch. It was a, whatever. Look at me, woohoo, that's amazing. And because it felt like it gave you credibility, right? That I was able to sell this much of my idea, product, course, service, whatever it was that I was promoting. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that, but the thing was that has a whole lot of missing information in that, one-liner, right? Of I had $100,000 launch. I know you have enough background behind the scenes experience to know there are people who had, $100,000 or $300,000 launches that cost them $280,000 to do. And so that sounds impressive, but I'm sorry, $20,000 is not, it's not much money left over. And oh, by the way, you probably haven't delivered the product yet. And so if there's any service delivery time involved in that, that's not nearly as outstanding as it sounds. And so I think we got addicted to that, ooh, look at this big number, sort of thing. And like you said, I mean, you said it at the beginning, it's true. Visionaries are also very much likely to be in some version of adrenaline junkie sort of behavior. I mean, it's part of the reason that visionaries are good visionaries is because they are risk takers, because they are willing to do some of these things. And so that does give all that, woohoo, adrenaline, right? That goes along with it. But the problem is the moment either that the $300,000 launch actually cost $280,000, that's not actually good. Or when the $300,000 launch costs $280,000, but it's only a $250,000 launch. So it's now cost you $30,000. And I also believe that for most people, that big bulk of money is actually harder to manage over time to pay expenses. So even if your $200,000 launch actually netted you $150,000, I'm just making up numbers. I have no idea, right? But even if it netted you that, how long does that money have to last? Are you actually parceling it out in a way that is useful so that you've got money for the entire time that you need money? Because most humans don't do well with big chunks of money because they say, ooh, I have a lot of money so I can spend it. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, I don't have enough money to finish paying payroll for the last 2 months of however long, let's say this is a 6-month, kind of time frame. Because we had a lot of money and so we spent a lot of money. And so all of those things, I think, are the challenge. And then, of course, our friend Nick Peterson, one of the things that he says, which I absolutely love, is on every side of a mountain is a valley. Yep. At the top of every mountain, you have to go down. That is the reality. That is life. That is nature. There is nothing that's not true about that. And that's the same thing even with the adrenaline. Even if you have the adrenaline rush at the top, at some point there is kind of an adrenaline crash with it. There's all sorts of things on the downside. And the higher the mountain, the further the fall down, right? If it's an anthill, that's not a very big fall. If it's a foothill, but if it's, Everest, that's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just like there's an amount of exhaustion that comes from a lot of high peaks and therefore low valleys in succession versus a high ascension to a very high plateau, right? And then going down. I mean, there's a lot of ways that your business model can affect how far or how fast you're having to boomerang on all of it. So I want to go back. So first of all, I did fact check us, and product launch formula came out in 2005. And so, which is why we're thinking 2014 is because that's when it reached critical mass of all the gurus, right?
Yep.
Because it takes about, I think it takes about 10 years of any big idea to actually disperse among the masses.
Yeah. 5 to 10 years would make perfect sense. So somewhere between 2010, 2015. Yep.
And then by 2014 is when people were all teaching their own versions of it, right? So some people, like I was thinking of Ryan Levesque. I don't know if anybody listening knows of him, but he was teaching like how to make it happen with $0 out of pocket, which really involved you were going to put everything on a credit card and then you were going to make it up on the back end with your big launch. So you were making money before that credit card payment was ever due, which I know, Gwen, you would not call that $0 out of pocket.
I would not.
Right. But that was the premise of it. And that was roughly about 2015. So okay. So this goes all the way back to 2005, which is why for some of us, this is how life has always been, because many people in business now were learning from somebody who learned from someone back then, right? It's like 20 years in the making, which we all know being in business, if you work online for 5 years, makes you feel like you're a dinosaur. The thing that I want to go back to, because I think you gave a great description, like what I would say a present level assessment. This is where we're at. This is the issue with where we're at. We've talked a little bit about how we got here. I want to just dig very briefly into the problem, but rather than agitate the problem, as we are taught to do in such things like PLF, is to contrast it with what I discovered when I was brand new in your business. So I'm just going to take our listeners on a very brief history ride, which is, I started working with Gwen in 2022, and I came on the heels of other marketing professionals that Gwen had hired. And, so not the first, probably not the last, but I wouldn't mind being the last. And, a lot of it was like, we've tried everything with marketing and it's all failed, but a lot of what had been tried before was built on the premise that those big launches were the ideal situation. So it was a lot of marketing professionals who were trying to fit your business into that mold. And one of the things that struck me early on, and when I say early on, I'm talking like the first 8 weeks that I was with you, was how peaceful it all was. Right?
I love that, how peaceful it was. Yes.
I just want to take you back because I know for a fact you didn't know how much of a unicorn you were back then until I pointed it out. But
That's true.
I don't know how much you remember back then, but when I was like, okay, so let's look at capacity, like let's look at my capacity as your service provider. Okay, so when are your launches? When are this? When are that? And you were like, well, we have a quarterly planning event and there's a lot that goes around that, but the quarterly planning event actually doesn't trigger a big sales period. It doesn't trigger a big, a retention period or a loss period. I mean, it's pretty much the same day in, day out, rinse and repeat as it always is. And in fact, if there's anything that spikes too high or spikes too low, I would want to dig deeper into that. Like, I wouldn't view that automatically as a good thing or automatically as a bad thing. And I went, as I do so eloquently when my brain is working. And and I was like, okay, so I reserved judgment. I did some interviews with current clients. And that was, one of the things that all of them really talked about was they wanted the peace that they saw that you had, the fact that you were never panicking. And I'm not saying that there's other coaches and consultants that panic with their clients, right? But there never seemed to be a panic about your pipeline, no stress about, oh my gosh, well, we have to make the most of this while we have it because next month we may not have this same energy. Next month we may not have this momentum. So there were never having to be any mid-cycle pivots, no big dramatic announcements. We didn't have to pull some kind of cash flow saving measure out of our back pocket. It was just consistent month after month, looking back year after year. And I think the first thing that I want to make sure everybody hearing knows is it's not because you're not ambitious, Gwen. It's not because you don't have goals, and it's not because your business isn't growing. Your business has grown since we started working together.
Oh yeah.
Right?
It's the first year I think it grew 50%. We had a flat year because we did a pretty major investment. And this year we're on track to grow another 100%.
Right. And I want to point out, note that she said, oh, well, 1 year was flat, not because revenue was flat, but because profit was flat.
Right.
Right? Because that's the other thing is all these other girls.
Actually, revenue was flat that year too.
Okay. Revenue was flat.
Yeah. Revenue was flat that year.
Okay.
But it was okay because we had other things that we were focusing on.
Right. But I just want to point out, it's not a lack of ambition. It's also not like, oh, the business is stagnant. It's really because whether you meant to precisely or not, you have intentionally designed a business model that operates in a steady, sustainable, drama-free way.
Yeah. And you're right. I did not intend to, but because that is my natural way of being, I did intend to. I just wouldn't have put those words around it.
Right. It's like you take out your legal pad and say 10 steps to designing a steady, sustainable, drama-free business. Step 1, I will never do traditional launches. Step 2, I'm not going to put thousands of dollars of social media ads on my credit card. Step 3, I will never do a webinar. And this goes back to something we've talked about throughout this show. And if you want to talk about this now, let's do that, because I do think it will help with the rest of the episode, which is you created a business in perfect alignment with who you are and what you value. Yeah. So tell us what you value.
So I value calm. My anchor is calm. And that's also what I provide my clients, because most of my clients are high visionaries, we're talking about the adrenaline junkie sort of, personality, not necessarily jumping off, base jumping off of buildings, but doing, other things that are, a little risky, a little fun, a little, shiny object syndrome kinds of things. And that is not my personality. I am not a traditional visionary. And by most people's, evaluation, they'd say, oh, Gwen is not a visionary. And I would also agree. That is not my primary attribute as an entrepreneur, is a visionary. I am primarily an operator. And I know that. And I think also by the time I was really starting this business, I too, like you, was not, I'm an internet dinosaur. Like I was already on the internet before I read Jeff Walker's book in 2005. Like I was selling things on the internet in 2000, and and people are like, well, so what? And it was like, yeah, no, I've been doing this for a really, 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 really long time. And because of that, I also was, and because of my natural personality, I was much less likely to get caught into the shiny object, syndrome thing, right? And also because I was older as I was doing this. Yeah. So this wasn't my first rodeo. I had already owned several businesses. I had worked in dozens and dozens of businesses. I had seen lots of things. And so I was able to say what actually works for me and make choices. Although I would still get caught in well, everyone says this is the way I should do it, so I guess this is the way I should do it. Because I would get caught kind of on the other side of like, well, I'm kind of old and maybe I'm out of touch, so maybe I need to be doing what they say that I should be doing, right? And so often the only times I would get out of alignment were when I would assume that my age was holding me back, right? And I wasn't doing what I should be doing because maybe I'm old and fuddy-duddy and, get off my lawn, you whippersnapper, kind of a thing. But generally that wouldn't work because it's not my personality. And anyone that knows me will say my personality is calm. I mean, very few people see me lose my mind. Yeah. Very often. I mean, even my husband, who, has lived with me for 27 years, will say, yeah, when Gwen loses her mind, it is scary and it is ugly, but it doesn't happen very often. So that calm really is the piece of it, and therefore aligned with that. And part of that is also the steady, that it's just kind of chunka along. And so I've made a number of choices that most business people weren't making, because I believe in that we're just going to chunk along bit by bit by bit. Doesn't mean that we're not climbing the hill, but if you know anything about trains can only take so much of an incline. Yeah. Right. There can be an incline, and I don't know what the degrees is, but it's a relatively small incline. And there's a place here in kind of southern mid California called the Tehachapi, where the train has to go up over the hill, but it goes around this like kind of a foothill, kind of a smaller hill, like 2 or 3 times. And there's like an overlook to be able to watch these really, really long, heavily laden trains that are going across and heading east, it goes around and around and around to be able to get high enough to be able to get over. It does not go up the hill. It is not doing that. And that's kind of the way that my life functions is I'm usually climbing the hill, but I'm climbing it at a much slighter angle. But that means I can climb it forever.
Yeah.
Because I'm never getting exhausted.
Yeah, you have the stamina to continue. So I was going to ask my next question, but what you just said reminds me of back in those early days when we were working together, and you were doing the classic, like, okay, so who is in any industry kind of where I want to be, and what are they doing? And then, who is in some similar industry or doing a similar thing that is where I want to be, and what are they doing? And you would bring up these various professionals, and I would say, well, but that's just, at the risk of saying lipstick on a pig, that's the same dude bro formula just delivered, by somebody who's wearing a skirt. It's all, but when you look under the hood, it's all the same. I would be like, it's all the same, Gwen. That's all the same. And you have said that you don't want to do that. And I remember one time, and we were at your house, and you kind of looked at me and you said, but what if they're doing it because it works? What if that's why they're all doing it? What if they're not all doing it because, they're all drinking the same Kool-Aid, but they're doing it because it actually works, and that's what we should be doing? And we sat with it for a while, and I did what I always do. I was like, okay, well, let's pretend you're true, and let's kick that can down the road and talk about what that all means. And where we landed was in a place that you absolutely positively knew you didn't want to be. And so that's how we sort of said, okay, yeah, that's not the path to go down. We're going to keep doing what feels right, even if it takes us longer to get where we want to be. But I'm curious nowadays, right? So now in 2025, I still imagine that there are people who you meet at networking events, especially people who don't know you very well, who might suggest that the way that you do business isn't that exciting, or might suggest that
there's almost all of them.
Way. So how do you respond to that? Because I bet there's people here listening who go to events and somebody says, oh, what you're doing would never work because of da-da-da, or this is a better way, and they don't know how to respond. So how do you respond, being that you're confident that you're doing the right thing in the right way, even if it flies in the face of what other people say you should do?
So my response is pretty consistent, and because often it's like, hey, what's the new big? And they always use the word big. What is the new big thing you're doing? And most of the time, my answer is, it's really interesting because I don't do new things or big things. I actually I said, I'm kind of boring. I said, and this is where I came up with the whole thing of, people who do big things have these big mountains that they climb, but then they have to fall down the other side at some point. And I said, I'm kind of boring. I just live on the plains. Usually we're getting, I said, I'm gaining a little bit of altitude here and there over time. But if I lose a customer, it doesn't make that big of a difference. And if I get a new customer, it also doesn't make that big of a difference. Right. So I'm not, and I kind of smile and I say, so it's kind of boring, but it's really consistent.
Yeah.
And it's totally sustainable. And it's like, yeah, so my life, I just kind of live on the plains. And people are like, oh. And there's always this, I never thought of that as a possibility face that comes with it. And usually there's not a lot of questions because you can tell, like, this is a completely new thought to them. And often that creates for interesting conversation later.
Yeah, but does
like,
anybody
how do you do that?
I was going to say, yeah, because obviously the stories you tell me are more when the conversations lead to people going like, well, how is it that you do that? And how long did it take you to do that? And have you always done that? Like the curiosity. But have you ever felt like somebody blew you off and was just like, yeah, that would never work? And then just kind of go away? Yeah.
Yeah. But I also know not everybody is for me.
Right.
And my people. And I'm completely okay with that. So that also is the other piece of, I don't have to, I'll say, quote unquote, be friends with everybody I meet. Okay. Right. There are going to be some people who are like, oh, well, then that means, I know what's going on in their head is some version of, well, that means you're not really an entrepreneur and you aren't really good at what you do. And, they're having some version of that conversation, or, oh, well, then you must be playing small, or, any of the rest of it. And it's like, that's fine. They're just not they're not my people.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to spend 2 minutes on this next question because I have a lot more ground that I want to cover with you. $200,000 lands in your bank account right now. And I don't want to get granular and talk about payment up front versus payment plans or any of that sort of stuff. But talk to me about the revenue side of things for you and the cadence of revenue. So how is the recurring revenue working for you? And you already said that it's hard to manage like big chunks of revenue at once, but just from your own perspective, like what are the pros and cons from the revenue model that you've chosen?
Well, so I would say the biggest pro is that I can project my revenue pretty accurately for long periods of time, right? Because I know that for the most part, this is my monthly recurring revenue, right? And I make adjustments as as something goes up or something goes down, because both things happen. And but when they do, it's not huge percentages, right? Usually if something goes up or down, it's a 10% kind of adjustment. Right. One way or other for the month, right? So it's not, and then it's like, oh, but the next month this other thing happened, so now it's back up. It just does it's only doing these tiny little adjustments. So I don't have to make giant changes and all of a sudden say, oh, Tonya and Sophia, you guys have to cut your hours by 75% because I'm not going to be able to pay you otherwise. I don't know, maybe once or twice, but for the most part, I've never told you that you had to stop working because I wouldn't be able to pay you.
No, you've actually never said that. You have said if something doesn't change in the next 90 days, we may need to revisit your hours.
Yeah.
But I feel like hardly anybody these days can really see 3 months in the future like you can.
Yeah. And it's not, and because of the way the revenue is, it's not hard for me to do it. Like I can look and absolutely say, I can make those changes. And so changes don't mean huge changes for me. Right. So a new customer doesn't mean, ooh, I've got all this money. But at the same point, a lost customer isn't like, holy crap, what am I going to cut? Neither of those things happen. And so I'm able to look a long way out and be able to start making some predictions about what I can do and what I can't do and all of those things. So for me, it's about the steadiness of the money. And therefore I also don't worry about, is that client renewing next month again and again and again? Because I kind of assume that they're going to renew, and I usually know about the time that they're either going to start cutting back on their services or they're going to not renew. And so it's like, usually when we have the conversation, it's like, yeah, you know what? I agree with you. Makes perfect sense. Go, and I don't have to get panicky, but it also means that I'm not paying for a whole lot of service to offer a launch that I don't know whether it will or won't deliver.
Yeah. So what I would say, so as somebody who has done launch strategy, launch management, fulfillment for, the course or the coaching side of large launches, the biggest benefit I see with your model is instant feedback. We can never get too far off course without knowing hands down whether it's working for clients or not, because every client is on a month-to-month retainer, regardless of level of service, it is literally month to month. If you want out, no questions asked. And so if something wasn't working, we would know within a month. Now, part of how you've structured your offer, it's like worst case scenario, right? We'd be up or down, say $3,000 in a month, unless something went horrible, right? Everybody canceled all at the same time, but the business is insulated against that. Whereas in these larger companies that I've worked for, let's just say it's a 6-month program. You're doing this big launch. You're bringing in $250,000 for the 6-month program. Then you go fully into fulfillment. You won't actually know if everybody feels like they got value until the end of that fulfillment phase, during which time it may be too late to adjust for your next
to fix
launch,
anything.
right? And so you can think everything went swimmingly because we did $250,000 on our last launch. But if there was something off in your delivery and you've got your entire cohort of people telling everybody it's the worst thing ever, you could get very surprised by a failure the next launch that you didn't know was coming.
Right. We do. We get pretty much instant feedback, and it works in both ways. Clients that aren't a good fit also leave very quickly. And mean, I don't know, maybe somewhere they're out there bad talking me, but I don't think they are, because there's not anything really to complain about, because they didn't pay for a 6-month program and only find 30 days of value in it.
Yeah.
So, so that's the other thing, is that they aren't paying for things that they aren't actually getting in it. Yeah. And so, for me, the instant feedback, and then part of that is I'm also, because I'm boring, is the offer that you saw when you came in 2.5 years ago is pretty much exactly what it is. I mean, like, we've made some minor tweaks, but I haven't changed my offers at all. I mean, every once in a while I'll add something new, or I may make a little adjustment, but my offers are consistent. I'm not always trying to do something new because I need to attract new people.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because I'm going to bring something that could be potentially a little bit ouchy for some listeners. So I just want to give you that warning. I don't even know how to ask the question, so I'm just going to come out with it. My perspective is that you lead a full life. And because you lead a full life, there is no huge gap that you need your business to fill. There's no big emotional gap that your business needs to fill for you. There's no big social gap that you need your business to fill for you. There's no big validation gap that you need your business to fill for you. I think you know where I'm going with this.
I do.
So talk to me about how, let's just say, fulfilling personal interests protect you from using business complexity as either entertainment or as personal fulfillment.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of people that I know in a variety of scenarios that use the excuse that they need to work all the time as the reason they don't have hobbies, they aren't doing all of these other things. But when you look closer, and because of the work I do, I get to look very, very close. I'm way under the hood and under the car and, through the engine and coming out through the air vents in people's businesses, right? I am all in it. It is very obvious that they are using their business to fulfill every aspect of their life. Mm-hmm. And although we want to enjoy our business, when we try and do that, that's also a reason people are burning out. Mm-hmm. Is because their brain is always in business mode, even if they love what they do. I said that a while back, that people can actually burn out doing what they love in their business. And people, what do you mean? It's like, well, no, you can, because part of this is your brain is only focused on one thing. And so, as you know, I do lead a very full life. I have multiple hobbies that are actual hobbies. My definition of a hobby is something that costs money but doesn't make money. that you enjoy doing.
So work is not your hobby.
The work can't be your hobby, right? I've had people say, oh, but this doesn't cost money, like running. Some will say, well, running's my hobby, but it doesn't cost money. It's like, and how much are those running shoes? And it's like, oh, right. Yes, it does cost money. Right. Some things cost more money than others, but and there are, I will admit, a lot of my friends I know through my work. That often happens to me. Mm-hmm. But also, I have a set of friends that I made through my knitting world back when that are still my friends. Mm-hmm. Right. And I still stay in contact with them, and we still talk, and we still do all of the things. So I have friends that are not my clients. I also feel like all of my clients are also friends, but they are not my only dependency for friendship. And so, I've got interests outside. I love spending time with my husband. I hate to say this, but I see many of the women who are way too buried deep in their business are actually avoiding their family situation. Mm-hmm. Whether it be with a spouse, with children, with parents, with, brothers and sisters, in-laws, mm-hmm. whatever, because it's a way that it's a justifiable way to avoid the family. Yeah. Oh, I've got to work on my business. I've got to work on my business. I've got to work mm-hmm. on my business. And so all of those things I think are absolutely true. And so that also allows me to, for lack of a better term, compartmentalize my business. When I'm working on my business, very much, I am all in on my business, and I am very focused on it. But I also do not work lots of hours beyond the hours that I've identified for my work. I mean, some weeks are longer than others, but most weeks are pretty much what I expect them to be.
Well, and I would say some weeks are longer than others, but very few weeks are longer by surprise.
That part's absolutely true. It's only if something really weird happens, which hardly ever happens, back to I have kind of a boring business, and the boring business is actually a win.
Yeah. I mean, so I take a note when you tell me that you're overwhelmed, which, by the way, when Gwen says she's overwhelmed, it really sounds like, I'm a little busier than I like to be right now. Feeling like there's a little bit more to catch up on than usual. So it's not like true pulling out your hair overwhelm. But in the time that we've worked together, it's come up 3 times. So 3 times in about 2.5 years, which is a pretty good average, I would say. So aside from setting aside the using business to escape your personal life, because that's not a coaching issue, that's a therapy issue. What would be give us like a couple of tips you would make to the listener who goes, hey, I do live way too much in the peaks and valleys. Like, I don't want that. What would be a first step and then a second step on how to live into more stability?
So the first would be looking for what actually can create stable income as opposed to income highs and lows. Mm-hmm. Right? And, there's a lot, and I'm not saying there's a best business model for that. There's 1,000, business models for that. And it's not necessarily recurring income, but there are things that you can do to kind of stabilize the income. Because once you stabilize the income, doesn't mean you can't still have peaks and valleys, but now all of a sudden the stable income is higher. So the peak doesn't need to be as high, which means the other side of it, if it doesn't go, isn't as low either. Yeah. So the first would be, what are the ways that you could potentially stabilize income and have less big flows, low flows, big flows, low flows? The second is and we've got a client this is her mantra for the entire year is no heroics. Mm-hmm. How do you create a business that doesn't require heroics, where someone has to come in and save the day? Because I think as entrepreneurs, and I've used this a lot, it's Dan Sullivan's quote that entrepreneurs are really good firefighters, which sometimes means they're also really good arsonists. Mm-hmm. If you can get out of that heroic mode, I also think that's the other place that you start seeing the stabilization of everything else, where it's like, nope, I don't want to ever have to work more than X hours in a week, right? And so I'm designing everything to not require heroics, which does mean we have to plan further out. We have to delegate things more fully and take less responsibility. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff. And that means we have to let go of the adrenaline rush of the heroics.
Yeah.
And that's way harder than that sounds.
Yeah. So step 1 is really looking at, okay, what makes sense in terms of stabilizing revenue? The second is let's make a commitment to no heroics. And then what has to be true in order for there not to be heroics. I feel like I'm not going to say that those are easy things to do, but
they're not easy.
2 very concrete next steps that you can take if that is a goal of yours, if you like this idea of living in the plains. And so I want to bring us to a close now. So I want to say thank you, Gwen, because it's not every day that we get to dig deep into somebody else's business and have them be honest and forthright about what works and what doesn't, even when it's different. It's so different from what everybody else does. And ultimately, what I hope anybody listening takes away is that living in the plains is really about the stability. It's about avoiding burnout. It's about preventing yourself from building a monster of a business that you have to keep feeding even when you've fallen out of love with it. So this kind of steady strength does allow for compound growth over time. And it does require a significant level of restraint because you have to stop chasing the dramatic highs if you want to avoid those devastating lows. And so the result will be, if you follow along here, is a business that serves your life, supports your goals, and grows consistently over time without requiring those heroics that Gwen talked about that sacrifice your peace of mind or your need for personal fulfillment. And if you are sitting right there going, oh my gosh, I do not like that you guys are talking about me right now. This does not feel good. And you're feeling trapped in that roller coaster cycle and you want to move toward the steady plains approach that we've been discussing. I think the first thing, aside from what Gwen has suggested, maybe the next step is to figure out, are you trapped in a burnout cycle? And if you think you might be, there's an easy way to figure it out, which is to take our Breaking the Burnout Cycle assessment, which also includes an action guide to help you identify what's keeping you stuck in that reactive mode and gives you some practical steps to reclaim time for what matters most. You can get that free at thebusinessyoureallywant.com/burnout. And at the very least, it's going to give you a good picture at what you should be doing to work on the right things so that you can build that kind of steady, sustainable business that we've talked about today. Gwen, thank you. And we will see each other next time. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallywant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.